going to learn a lot more about you, and you're going to learn a lot more about me as we study this text here this morning. So John chapter 11, verse 5. Let's just go ahead and dive right in. If you're new with us today, we have been in this series called Because He Lives, and this is where we've been studying Jesus' resurrection and the impact and the transformation that truth can have on our lives. John 11, verse 5. John 11, verse 5. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. Let's go and stop right there. Mary loved them. Mary loved his family. The reason I want to start in this verse instead of verse 1 is because I really want to emphasize that point. If you're new to this text here this morning, basically what you've missed is there's this man named Lazarus, and he's very sick. And his sisters sent a messenger to run up to Jesus and say, Lazarus is sick. Jesus, the person you love, is sick. He's very ill. You need to come and attend to him. But then it has this little caveat. Jesus loved Martha and Mary and Lazarus. And Lazarus is very sick. Now, we hear all the time that God loves us. You know, we sing the songs, Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so. You know, we know God loves us. But it really emphasizes this point that Jesus, really loved Lazarus. He really loved this family. He's really close to them. And here's why. Jesus was a traveling minister. He was a traveling teacher that would travel for several miles to all these different little towns. And he didn't have a home base. He had a hometown, and he was kicked out of it at the beginning of his ministry. So he really didn't have a home. He just wandered around the region helping people, healing people, performing miracles for people, preaching about the kingdom of God, teaching people, feeding the poor, helping people. That's what Jesus was doing for 3 years, walking around. And he was dependent on people's hospitality. He was dependent on people taking him in, providing a meal for him and his disciples, and they would talk till the wee hours of the morning. Could you imagine Jesus staying in your guest bedroom? Could you imagine that? Sometimes it would be for days or weeks, on end. He would be there. A lot of you would feel the pressure, man, I need to clean up. Jesus is coming, Martha did too in another story. She's like, I got to get the food ready. Jesus is in my house. That was a good story too. But Jesus is staying. Could you imagine the conversations you would have with him around the fire in the wee hours of the morning? Could you imagine that? Jesus is staying in my guest bedroom. That's how this was. This was a very close family. You'll notice that there are no spouses mentioned. There are no children mentioned. Just 2 sisters and a brother living in a home. And Jesus was really close with them. They were all they had in the world in this tiny little house in Bethany. And Jesus would come in and he would minister to them. They were really close. They became really good friends. He would always make sure he'd stop at their house when he was in town. So they were really close to Jesus. This is one of Jesus' closest friends, Lazarus. And because they say, the one you love is sick. The one you love is sick. He's sick. Lazarus is sick. His friends are sick. How would you respond if one of your best friends were sick? Would you drop whatever you're doing and at least give him a call and say, hey, are you okay? I heard you were really sick. What does Jesus do? What did Jesus do? Let's read on. Verse 6. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. Does that make any sense at all to you? Geez, Jesus, just take your sweet time. Oh man, that's a bummer. He's sick. Let's go play putt-putt. What is going on, Jesus? Why are you just... No, that's terrible news. Let's stay where we are for 2 more days. Does that make any sense at all? You can see this story start out with a great deal of tension, can't you? Jesus hears his friend is sick. It's clear he dearly loves this family, and he stays put for 2 more days. He just takes his time. Where is the urgency here? Have you ever asked that of God? God, where are you? God, why aren't you showing up when I need you right now? God, some terrible things are happening in my life. I need you right now. Where are you, God? And God is quiet. He never shows up. Isn't that, can you feel that tension in your heart as well as it's clearly portrayed in this text? Lazarus needs you. Let's stay where I am for 2 more days. God, where are you? He's not talking back. We don't know where he's at. We feel that, don't we? Here's a little saying someone really wise once told me. He said, God is rarely early, he's often late, but he's always on time. God is rarely early, he's often late, but he's always on time. See, we have this idea that God needs to fit into our mold on our timetable. God, you need to show up right now. I need you right now. And he's always late, but he's always on time. His timing is perfect. He is always on time. Jesus takes forever to get there. We don't know how much time. We don't really know. We just know that he stayed put for 2 days. And then after he stays put, he's got to walk there. Like, we're talking walking time, ministry time. We just know that he stayed put for 2 days. And this was urgent. This is an urgent situation. It is urgent enough for them to send a messenger to run to Jesus and say, hey, your friend is sick. This is urgent stuff here, but he's taking his time. Could you imagine this scene play out? Think about Lazarus on his deathbed, essentially, at home. He's taking a turn for the worst, and his sisters are comforting him, Lazarus, just sit tight. Just sit tight. Just a little while longer, Lazarus. Just a little while longer. Jesus is coming. Your friend Jesus is coming. He's going to save the day. Lazarus, hold on. Stay with us. Stay awake. Stay conscious. Look in my eyes. They're wiping the sweat off his forehead. They're holding his hand, giving him comfort. He's very, very ill. They're looking out the window, looking at the horizon. They're acting kind of like Lindsay and I did when we were waiting for the ambulance a couple weeks ago. He's coming. He's coming. He's got wind. I'm sure he's hurrying here. Can you see them looking out the window at the horizon? Where's Jesus? Jesus is coming. Hold on, buddy. Hold on, Lazarus. Jesus is coming. He's coming. He's going to save the day. Let's skip ahead. Verse 17. Verse 17. He's late. On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. He's late. He is way late, but somehow on time. Not counting the time to prepare the body or the funeral, the mourning time. We just know that Jesus had stayed put for 2 days and Lazarus had been in the tomb for 4. We don't know how long it took Jesus to get here, how long Lazarus held on to his life before Jesus arrived. We just don't know. But we do know that he's late, but somehow on time. Verse 18. Now Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed home. Look at that. Mary stayed home. Isn't that curious? A curious little detail put in the story. Mary stayed home. Do you think she was sulking? Do you think she was upset? Do you think she has a chip on her shoulder? Why does John put that detail in there? Do you think she's mad at Jesus? Do you think she's bitter? Do you think she's saying to herself, why on earth should I run out and greet him if he couldn't run out here to save my brother? Can you see that thought entering her mind? Have you ever felt that way? Have you ever been mad at God? Have you ever blamed God for the horrible things that have been happening or have happened to you? Have you ever stayed home a Sunday or 2 or 10 or 20 because you were mad at God? Some of you in this room and some of you listening at home online are furious with God right now. You are furious. We blame God, don't we? Don't we blame him when things don't go our way? Martha runs up to Jesus in verse 21 and she says, it's the first words that come out of her mouth. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. You see, God gets the blame when horrible things happen to us, doesn't he? When we don't have a proper understanding of God, every bad thing that ever happens to us is God's fault. God then becomes the bad guy when things do not go our way. God gets the blame when horrible things happen. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. If you had been here, I would not have lost my job. If you had been here, I wouldn't have sat through an agonizing divorce. I wouldn't have buried my child if you had been here. I wouldn't be haunted by the things that happened so long ago if you had been here. God, if you had been here, these things would not have happened. This life would have turned out differently. God, if you had been here, these things would not have happened. For way too many of us, the conversation unfortunately ends there, doesn't it? Bad things happen, we go out to meet God, and the first thing that comes out of our mouth is, God, if you had been here, this bad thing would not have happened. And then we walk away bitter, don't we? Too many conversations in that way with God. Way too many things turn out that way, where we get mad at God for something bad happening to us, and then we go out and confront him. And we say, God, if you had been here, this bad thing would not have happened to me. And then the conversation ends there. We walk away bitter. We are left to rot in our bitterness. Too many of our stories end with us blaming God and walking away. And we miss out on a miracle. But she continues. Pay very close attention to this exchange. Verse 22, she continues. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha answered, I know he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. She's doing the same thing we do, right? She's like, oh, I have hope. I'll see him again. I know I'll see my brother again. He's going to rise again on the last day. Here's how the Jewish people in the first century pictured the afterlife, okay? She believes, like so many people around her, that when a person dies, they go to this banqueting table in the sky if they were a devout Jew, when they died, when they were religious, when they loved God, when they had a good relationship with God, they believed that when they died, they would go up to this banquet table in the sky, and they would eat and eat and eat. A big family, big feast. God's there, Abraham's there, Moses is there, and they're all eating for like ever. It's like a meal that never ends. You know, and some of you are like, man, I need to convert to Judaism after this morning. Man, a big meal in the sky, golden corral in the sky. No pulled pork, of course, though. Not up there. But man, but she believes this, that yes, of course, we're all going to rise again someday in heaven, and we're going to see each other again. And I know I have hope, Jesus. I know what you're telling me, Jesus. I know it's going to be okay, Jesus, in the future. We do that all the time, don't we? Oh, don't worry, like, you'll see him again. Oh, they're in heaven smiling down on you right now. They're my guardian angel. We tell ourselves all these things to help us cope and get through these horrible times. She is hopeful she will see her brother one day. So many of us hope for that. It helps us feel better when someone dies. Heaven is a consolation prize to many, a tale that we tell to keep our spirits up in time of sadness. It looks really good on a Hallmark card. I can see Jesus grabbing her shoulders and looking directly into her eyes. Can you see him doing this? He takes her aside, he grabs and looks her in the eyes, and he says this. This is a great verse. It's a great memory verse growing up. I need you to see this verse, okay? Just listen as he says this. He says to her, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, though they may die, and whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? Do you believe this? He asks, do you believe this? I'm asking you the same thing here this morning. Do you believe this? Because if you do, that changes everything. It changes how you live. It changes how you die. It changes absolutely everything. And that's what this series has been about. This is what Josh has been talking about the last couple weeks, and we'll continue to talk about in the next couple. This is huge. The ramifications of you believing that Jesus is the resurrection and the life. I love it. It's singular. It's even in the Greek, it's singular. I am the resurrection and the life. Jesus is the only way. He is the only resurrection and the only life. The only one. The only hope. A day is coming. A day is coming when your heart will stop beating, your lungs will stop breathing air, and you will shut your eyes for the last time. Jesus is our only hope that they will one day open again. Jesus is the resurrection and the life. Do you believe this? Do you believe this? Look at her response. Yes, Lord, she replied. I believe that you are the Messiah. I believe you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is to come into the world. And after she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. The teacher is here, she said, and he is asking for you. You see, because bitterness has no place when you come in contact with the resurrection and the life. Bitterness has no place there. If he is indeed the Messiah, if he is indeed the Christ, the resurrection and the life, you do not have time to be mad at him. You do not have time to be bitter at him. You need to get up and run and meet him, preferably soon. When Mary heard this, she got up quickly, next verse, and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who had been with Mary in the house comforting her noticed how quickly Mary got up and went out, they followed her. supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn. The word for mourn is a really interesting one. It's a very heavy word. In fact, lots of other translations call this word weep. They translate it to weep. Like Mary had gone up to go to the tomb to weep there. They're deeply tied together, weeping and mourning. And it's a word that describes really deep, raw emotion, pain, anguish, turmoil, suffering. You are in pain as you are crying out because you're mourning, because you're weeping. This isn't just a tear being shed. This isn't just dust getting in your eyes. This is deep, intense mourning, weeping, wailing. Many other translations, you can see it. There's shaking, there's crying uncontrollably. They are in need of deep consolation. That's why all of these friends come in from the city to hang out with her. They know that she needs them to comfort her and be with her. Deep emotion, weeping, sobbing. These friends of hers see her heading towards the tomb, and they assume she's going to weep again. They've seen a lot of that week. They assume she's going to mourn again. She has likely wept and mourned a lot these past few days. Verse 32. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said something a lot of us say, Lord, if you had been there. This is a refrain over and over in this text. If you had been here, my brother would not have died. And when Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and greatly troubled. He was deeply moved in spirit and greatly troubled. There's a lot of emotion in this moment, isn't there? Is he sad for them? Yes, I believe he's sad for them, but I think it's deeper than that. Does he think it's his fault? No, I think it's deeper than that. Is he faking it? No. He is deeply, genuinely moved and greatly troubled in spirit. Death is a horrible, horrible thing. Back when I was in high school, my parents, they tried to jam-pack my summer schedule full of events. I was really annoying back then, and I got on their nerves a lot, so they made sure that when school was let out, they could get rid of, they would make sure I have a lot of activities and events. I had a jam-packed summer schedule, and I'm sure that my parents were the only ones that did that. Well, anyway, since I was terrible in sports, they signed me up for this traveling concert Christian choir called Highest Praise, and is based out of Ozark Christian College in Joplin, Missouri, Southwest Missouri, where kids, Christian high schoolers from all over the country, all over the world, mainly Missouri, would try out, and we'd wear khaki pants and sweater vests, and we would learn music, and we would hop in tour buses and travel all over the nation, namely the Midwest, and we would get there, and we would sing Stephen Curtis Chapman and Michael W. Smith songs to churches all over the Midwest. So it was great. Highest Praise. It was a real hoot. Well, as a freshman, I had a lot of trouble making friends. I was really shy, really introverted back then. I had a lot of trouble making friends. And when you are the dork and the social outcast on a tour bus full of khaki pants, you're not doing so well. You're not. It was so awkward on that bus. The silence was so deafening on that bus that I actually envied Forrest Gump, like seats taken, can't sit here, seats taken. Because at least they talked to him, right? But I would walk that tour bus looking for a seat, and I had a seat all by myself halfway through the bus, and I'd walk there every day to my seat on the bus all by its lonesome with my head down. And one day, a couple weeks into the tour, I looked down, and there was a note for me on my chair. And it went like this. On the inside, it read, Braden, I hope you are having a great tour. We would love for you to sit with us. Come to the back of the bus and join us. Signed, Amy. Amy was a really special person. She was a junior. No, she was a senior. She had a lot of friends, and she invited me to sit with her that day. We had long hours on these tour buses, and she asked me about my hometown, my family, my hobbies, my things I like to do for fun. She made me feel welcome and not so out of place. She would talk for hours about Jesus. She loved Jesus and how much she loved him. And her family, she talked about her family all the time. She loved them dearly. She pulled out a picture one day of her family, and she said, that's my mom, that's my dad, and that's my little sister who's in heaven. She lived in a tiny town called Golden City, Missouri, a tiny town in the middle of nowhere. Her parents ran a funeral home, and they lived in the house above it. Her little sister died a couple years ago of meningitis. She was just 13 years old. Now, it's just me and my dad and my mom, she said. We like to think of my little sister as our guardian angel, looking over us. We know that's not true, but it helps us cope. It helps us mourn. It helps us remember her and keep her involved in our lives. Then she said something I'll never forget. She said, I'm all they got in the world now. We became good friends. And this was back before the internet, so we were pen pals. And some of you in this room are like, what's a pen? But we would talk on the phone and write back and forth for several years. Then my senior year, I got a strange phone call. It was from her mom. She left a message on my answering machine, and some of you are like, what's an answering machine? The message said, Braden, I need you to call me. This is Amy's mom. Something terrible has happened. I felt a giant pit in my stomach. I couldn't bring myself to call her back. I waited a day. I knew the news that awaited me deep down. I finally brought myself to call her back, and I learned this terrible news. Amy was driving home from her job after work late into the night. She was tired. It was raining. She crossed over the middle line and overcorrected and hit a tree and was killed instantly. I hung up the phone in shock. I was numb. I went to sleep crying that night. Why, God? Why? Why Amy? Of all the people who die in this world every day, good ones, bad ones, why Amy? Of all the people who die every day, some young, some old, why Amy? Why young? Why good Amy? Why, God? Of all the people who die that have huge families, have multiple brothers and sisters, multiple family members, why her? Why are her family crying themselves asleep? Why is her mom and dad crying themselves asleep tonight, knowing they're all alone? Why, God? Why Amy, God? We went to the funeral. My dad drove me. It was in this tiny wooden church at the center of this tiny wooden town. The sky was blue that day. There wasn't a cloud in the sky. The church was packed. It was packed full of sobbing people. Down front was the casket, and there were pictures of angels painted on it. And inside, there lay my friend. I heard whispers among the others in the room that because this was the only funeral home within 50 miles, her parents had to prepare her body. I became sick to my stomach. I sat through the sermon. Oh, I sat through that sermon. Given by this smug pastor with a smile on his face, saying that in Christ there are no goodbyes, just good nights, I'll see you in the morning. He delivered as if he didn't even know the people in there, didn't even know the family. I wanted to punch him in the face. I remember filing out of that tiny church with tears streaming down my face. I remember looking back at her parents as they were saying their final goodbyes. They're stroking her hair, giving her one last kiss, watching friends and family desperately trying to console them. I remember the graveside service, her family refusing to leave, her mom crying out, her dad shaking. He's shaking, like looking straight ahead, shaking with a red face, has his sunglasses on. He's trying to hold himself together for his family. He's trying to be strong. His family being told by the pastor that it was time to go. The people lowering this angel casket into the ground and putting dirt in the hole as we drove away. Crying all the way home. I'm just thinking about her parents. These poor parents. All alone now. 2 daughters gone. The children taken from them far too soon. No future weddings to plan. No father of the bride dances. No future sons-in-law. No grandkids playing on their front lawn. They just have pictures now. Memories now. They're empty now. Why is Jesus deeply moved and troubled in spirit? Why? Why is Jesus deeply moved and troubled in spirit? Why? Well, it's because he's life. He is life. He is the resurrection and the life. He's the way, the truth, and the life. He has come that they may have life, and life to the full. He is life. God is the author of life. Death bothers him. Death troubles him. He is deeply moved and grieved by death, because death was never supposed to be a part of life. This is not how it's supposed to be. People were not supposed to die. Can you imagine this life, this God coming to this earth and looking around and seeing all the death, all the pain, all the suffering? Can you see this scene here? Jesus is watching his friends, his good friends, weeping uncontrollably, weeping at the tomb of his friend. Oh, death bothers him. Death doesn't sit well with Jesus because he's life. It was never supposed to be this way. Paul says it clearly in Romans 3. He says, the wages of sin is what? Death. The consequences of sin entering this world is that we no longer have life to look forward to. We have death. Death is universal. Death awaits us all because we live in this fallen, sinful world. Death was never a part of the plan. And it grieves him. It deeply moves Jesus to look around and see all the people he cares about grieving and in pain. There's never supposed to be pain. There's never supposed to be sickness. These people dying around him that he knows and loves. He is deeply bothered by death because he is life. He is the author of life. This scene disturbs him. He is greatly troubled because we weren't supposed to die. Verse 34. Where have you laid him? He asked. Come and see, Lord, they replied. And then we have the shortest and arguably one of the most powerful verses in the entire Bible. It lets you know that God has feelings. It lets you know that God can succumb to emotion. 2 words means everything here. It says so much. Jesus wept. Jesus wept. That same word, that powerful word, tied to deep emotion, tied to mourning. Jesus wept. Not just a tear, not a fake cry, not a sympathetic pat on the back with a wink wink and a nudge nudge. It'll all work out in the end. Stop crying, charade. Chin up. No, deep emotion, shaking, hands to the face, puffy eyes, tears dripping down his face, off his beard to the dust below. He wept. He wept. This text here gives you permission. If someone you know dies, if someone you don't know dies, you have permission to weep freely. And I don't care how much hope you have permission to weep. Gentlemen in this room, I want to talk to you for a moment. Jesus is more of a man than we will ever be. Amen? Jesus is stronger than we could ever be. He's more of a man than all of us in this room put together. And by God's grace, we can become like him, right? But this gives you permission too. He wept. He wept. And you can too. You have permission to weep because we were not supposed to die. Reading on, then the Jews said, see how he loved him. But some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? That's a good question that's used a lot, right? Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? Could not this powerful guy that's performing miracles all over, why couldn't he have stopped Lazarus from dying? It's a great question. But I think the answer is Jesus is not concerned with self-preservation here. Jesus did not come to this world to keep you from dying. Because if God really came to this earth, if this was his mission statement, to keep you from dying, he has a 0% success rate, doesn't he? Everybody's dying, left and right. God is not here. God's mission in life is not to keep you from dying. But he is the resurrection and the life. Jesus has all these mission statements. He says, like, I have come that they may have life and life to the full. Or, I've come, the Son of Man has come to seek and save that which was lost. Or, the Son of Man had not come to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many. Like, Jesus comes in and has all these mission statements, but never once does he say, Jesus, the Son of Man, came to this earth to keep you from dying. That just isn't there. It's not there. God never promises to keep you from dying. But this question still hangs. It's a cloud hanging over this entire scene. Couldn't the man who opened the eyes of the blind have kept this man from dying? I ask that question a lot. We ask it a lot. Couldn't this all-powerful God keep people from dying? I remember asking that question 2 Januaries ago. It was January 2012. So last year, I guess. I was a youth minister at our last ministry in Greencastle, Indiana. And during my time there, I became really close to this kid named Rodney. Now, Rodney was adopted. He and his brother grew up in inner city Indianapolis. And they were raised by a single mom. It was a really tough situation. They lived in the projects. The mom was always strung out on drugs. They're on welfare. This is him, the picture behind me to the far left. Let's go and keep that picture up the whole time, okay? He and his brother were raised by a single mom in a terrible situation. And when her health failed, and he and his brother were put in the foster system. And she did not live much longer after that. She died not long after. And there they were, these two brothers, not knowing their father and burying their mother. That is where Troy and Becky come in. They are the couple to the right of this picture. They're fantastic people. Troy and Becky are amazing people. They're strong Christians, great friends, great parents in our youth ministry. Becky had lupus, and therefore she couldn't have children safely. There were memories of her and Troy going to the altar at the front of the church during worship and crying out to God, God, just give us children. Please give us children. They were both teachers in the school system. And that's where they found out about these boys that desperately needed a mom and they desperately needed a dad. Troy and Becky adopted them both. You should have met Becky. You would have loved to meet Becky. Becky was an incredible, amazing person. She was incredible. Have you ever seen the movie The Blind Side? You ever seen that movie? She was just like her, okay? Like full of energy, full of life, a huge heart. Rodney couldn't play football very well, but she was really great. It was just like that movie. And as God would have it, a few years later, Troy and Becky had 3 beautiful kids of their own. Rodney was a great big brother, and he would constantly help take care of the little ones. It was a great family. Isn't that a great picture on the beach? One Sunday, 2 Januaries ago, that family's world got turned upside down. We were at church, and we were hanging out after service. We were joking around and talking, me and a bunch of students. And we were hanging around with Rodney. And then we see some commotion going on outside of the women's restroom. Troy comes bursting out of the women's restroom, looking disoriented, dazed, bewildered, and in tears. He runs to Rodney and says, "Something happened to your mom. We have to go to the hospital. Please take the babies and shield them from what is going on until the ambulance arrives." He was in a panic. Rodney was stunned. We all were stunned. Apparently, toward the end of the service, Becky wasn't feeling well, and she felt like she had the stomach flu. And she rushed into the women's restroom, and she splashed water on her face, looked at herself in the mirror, and dropped to the floor dead. Dead. No pulse. No breathing. The paramedics rushed to the scene, and they tried to revive her. They lifelined her immediately to St. Vincent's Hospital in Indianapolis and barely revived her on the way there. I drove Rodney to the hospital. He was numb. He was in shock. We prayed. I held him, having absolutely no idea what to say. I took a lot of ministry classes in college. Not one of them covered this moment. He starts crying. What are those babies going to do without a mama? What am I going to do without a mama? I've already lost one mom. I can't lose her too, he said. The doctors fought desperately to keep Becky alive. Machines were breathing for her. The estimates were that she went without oxygen and a heartbeat for over 20 minutes. She crashed 5 times that day alone, going long periods of time without a pulse. She was shocked with the paddles so many times that the heart specialist said, if she crashes one more time, we will not try to revive her. And in a couple days, they would check the brain to see if she was even still with us. Several days passed, and the swelling in the brain started to go down. Machines were keeping her alive. Rodney and his brother sat in the waiting room. Lindsay and I were sitting with them when the doctors told Troy the terrible news that she would not make it, that she was completely brain dead. The machine that tests the amount of brain waves, the brain activity going on, read 0. They did all of these tests that perform on patients in this situation, all the legal tests that they have to do to prove that this patient would not recover, that this patient was in fact dead and lifeless. And she failed every one of them. She was completely brain dead. They were telling him some hospital jargon about how if she had even 10% brain activity, she could be a vegetable and they could keep her alive. But since it's 0, they recommended that the next morning they pull the plug. She was gone. I mean, to have this conversation with Rodney was very painful. His mom would not wake up. His mom would not make it. She was gone. And the only thing that we could think of to console him a little bit during this time was she went home to be with the Lord on Sunday, 4 days ago. And she's been there watching over this ever since. It was devastating ride home. Devastating. We stopped by 12 or so of Rodney's friends' homes, and he went in to share the terrible news that his mom would not make it, that they'd have to pull the plug the next morning. There a lot of crying, a lot of weeping went on. A lot of weeping. Troy broke down sobbing and weeping. He said, Lindsay, Braden, will you take Rodney home to your house tonight? Let him stay the night with you. Okay. So we drove him home. It's a horrible ride home. Lots of tears were shed. Then he got wind of the posts on Facebook. Half of them were announcements that she had passed away and that a vigil will be held in her honor. The other half were from Christian friends and friends from our church saying, there's still hope. Her heart's still beating. Pray for continued healing. Rodney was furious. I was furious. This is a time to mourn. I remember shouting, this is a time to mourn. Let this family mourn, for crying out loud. Enough of this pray a little harder. God is not done with her yet. Tinkerbell, fairy dust, hold your hands and God will heal garbage. Let this family mourn. Enough of this false hope. You can say God will heal her, but you aren't driving one of your students to the hospital at 5 a.m. the next morning. You won't be there with him when he pulls the plug. You won't hold him when the machine turns off and the faint heartbeat on the screen, the artificial one flatlines, and there's nothing you can do about it. You won't be there for them when you see them pick out little suits and a little dress for their 2-year-old children to wear at their mother's funeral. A mother they will never know. A mother that they'll only have pictures of and video of. Enough with this false hope. Now is a time to mourn. It's over. Rodney had finally cried enough. He was yelling at God in my front yard for over an hour. He finally went to bed. Lindsay and I lay down in our bed exhausted, repeating this same question over and over again. Why, God? Why couldn't you have kept her from dying? Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept her from dying? She has 2 little kids at home. 2 little kids. 2 little babies. And then a 5-year-old. Why, God? Death is a horrible thing. We talked through her funeral, what songs they would want, and fell asleep exhausted. I woke up a few hours later to a loud banging on my front door. Loud banging on my front door. Shouts coming from my front yard. Get up! Wake up! Something has happened! I wake up and I run downstairs and I open this door half asleep. It's one of our elders from church, and he's just like shouting in my front yard in the wee hours of the morning. She's alive! She's alive! Get Rodney up! And I'm like, no, you don't understand. Did you not get the memo? You nut jobs need to stop with the false hope and let them mourn. No, Braden. No, she's alive. She woke up last night. Her brain activity is 100%. Her eyes are awake and looking around. Her feet are moving. She about scared the orderly to death? Yes, to death. But she's not dead. She's alive. It's the most amazing moment I will ever witness in all my years of ministry. I'm already calling it. Happen next. I ran into Rodney's room and I shook him awake. She's alive, Rodney. She's alive. She woke up. It's a miracle. She was dead, but now she's alive. And he gets up. He's like, whoa. He's all disoriented and confused. He has this huge smile on his face. And he runs and hops into my car all dazed. He says, let's go. We did. 15 days later, Becky was home from the hospital. Fully there, same old Becky. The doctors were astonished. Never before had they seen anything like it. I remember overhearing a doctor saying later, he said, either this was a miracle from God or an alien life form animated her lifeless body. I have no idea. I'm like, I'm going to go with the first one, or option A on that one. They were bewildered and speechless. Becky doesn't remember a thing about the several days where she wasn't with us. She's just happy to be alive. She remembers fainting in the bathroom and waking up in the hospital. She is so happy to spend more time with her kids. She cherishes each day she has. Like, isn't that awesome, church? Isn't this story like one of the most amazing things you've ever heard? It's crazy. I'm glad you guys have a pulse this morning. That's good. Let's finish this story, okay? Let's finish this story. I'm in verse 38. Let's just read it, and we'll close this morning, okay? Verse 38. Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. Take away the stone, he said. But Lord, Martha, the sister of the dead man, said, by this time there's a bad odor, for he's been in there 4 days. Jesus is funeral crashing. Have you noticed that? He's like a grave robber now. Like, this is deeply unconventional what he's saying to do. He's been in there 4 days. The King James Version says he stinketh. So look that up at home. Then Jesus said, did I not tell you that if you believed you would see the glory of God? So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe you have sent me. Then when he had said this, Jesus called out in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth wrapped around his face. Jesus said to them, take off the grave clothes and let him go. What an amazing story. What an amazing thing. This man was dead for 4 days. Now he's alive. And you're probably sitting here wondering, like, what's the point of this message here this morning? What really does all this resurrection stuff mean to me? What is all this stuff here? I'm here to tell you, maybe one of the things that you can learn this morning is that it's never okay to be bitter with God. It's never okay to end the conversation with, Lord, if you had been here, this bad thing wouldn't have happened, and walk away. Maybe that's you here this morning, and you need to run to God and make up with them, and maybe a miracle will happen. Like, maybe we need to cut off this bitterness stuff. Maybe you're here this morning, and you have this false sense of what to do when people are suffering, when people are mourning. It is okay to mourn with them. It is okay to weep with them, because death is a horrible, horrible thing. But it's also okay to have hope. Hope that Jesus is indeed the resurrection and the life. And that when we close our eyes someday, we have faith in him that he will open them. That's a beautiful, beautiful thing. Maybe the point of this message this morning is this, that this is a God that's not about self-preservation. Jesus has nothing to do with self-preservation. He has everything to do with the resurrection. Jesus is not here to keep you from dying. Jesus isn't here to keep you holding on to the life you once had. In fact, this resurrection theme gets played out over and over again in the New Testament, where we are dead to our sin, we're buried in baptism, and raised to walk in newness of life. Where Jesus' resurrection is portrayed when we go down in the water and then come up a new creation, a new person. There's this spiritual thing going on where we shouldn't hold on to our old life, our old sin. We should, in fact, be raised to walk in newness of life with Jesus. Maybe that's the point of the message here this morning. Jesus is not concerned with self-preservation. He's concerned about a resurrection. I love what he says. 2 things he says after Lazarus walks out. Everybody's gasping, right? I mean, everybody's astonished. What does he say? Lazarus, come out of the tomb. The other thing he says, take those grave clothes off. And some of you here this morning in a spiritual way, you're dead in your sins. You're holding on to this life. You're in your tomb. You're just sinning. You're running from God. I'm here to tell you this morning that sin leads to death. That sin is death. That sin that you're holding on to, the sin that you won't admit to, the sin you won't get help for, that is destroying you. It is destroying your life. And it's killing you. Maybe this morning you need to get out of that tomb, get out of that darkness, get out of that dead place, and be raised to walk in newness of life. The other thing Jesus says to do, take the grave clothes off. Why? Because he's not in the grave anymore. He's not dead anymore. It is unnatural for Lazarus, the once dead man, to be wearing dead people clothes. Maybe I'm here to tell you this morning too. Stop looking like everybody else in this dead world. Stop looking like everybody else that are walking around like zombies in our streets in grave clothes. Stop living like the world wants you to live and live like Jesus wants you to live, because he came that you have life and life to the full. He came so that you would be raised to walk in newness of life. Stop looking like everybody else. Get out of your tomb. Take your grave clothes off. Maybe that's what I'm here to say this morning. I don't know what God is teaching you through this text this morning, but I do know what he says, and he looks at Martha and he says it with all the certainty in the world. I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live even though he dies. That is our hope here this morning. I'm going to pray, and we're going to have a time of worship. And while we're singing these songs, I want you to stand. And if you're here this morning and you just need prayer, there will be people going to different places around the room. Maybe you need to come up to them and say, you know what, I've messed up. I'm hiding this sin. I need prayer. I'm living in this dead world. I need help. Maybe we can pray for you there. I'll be sitting on the front row if you want to pray with me too after the service or during this time. Maybe you need to, maybe you're sitting in this room today and you're saying, you know what, God has nothing to do with me anymore. I'm done. I'm too far gone. I'm too bitter. I can't do this anymore. I can't do this Christian thing anymore. I'm here to tell you that God is rarely early, often late, but he's always on time. And if God's stirring something up in your heart this morning, I want you to come and make that known. Come and get that prayed for, okay? But we're going to sing, and then we're going to have this time of prayer after these songs. But I'm going to pray as everybody moves into their positions. Lord, thank you that you are the resurrection and the life. I thank you that we can